was a cold Thursday night, around 10:30 p.m. I just finished a late shift at work, exhausted and starving. I didn't feel like cooking, so I decided to swing by the local Wendy's near my apartment. You know the one, the kind of place that looks normal during the day, but at night, under those flickering neon lights, it has this weird, almost unsettling vibe. It was one of those half-empty, run-down locations on the edge of town. The parking lot was cracked, littered with trash, and only a couple of cars were scattered around. The fluorescent lights inside gave everything this sickly green tint. I pulled into the drive-thru, but the speaker was crackling, and no one answered. After a minute, I figured the drive-thru was closed, but the sign said they were open until midnight. So I parked and went inside. The moment I stepped through the door, I felt off. It wasn't the usual fast food atmosphere. It was too quiet. There was no music, no sounds of the fryers or people talking. Just this heavy, unnatural silence. One guy was behind the counter. He looked to be in his late 40s, with stringy hair tucked under a greasy Wendy's cap. His uniform was stained, and his eyes, his eyes were the first thing that really unsettled me. They were too wide, like he was trying to stare straight through me. But I was tired and hungry, so I brushed it off. "Hey, you guys still open?" I said, trying to keep it casual. He didn't answer right away, just kept staring. Then after what felt like forever, he nodded. No smile, no welcome to Wendy's, just a slow, stiff nod. I walked up to the counter and ordered a Baconator combo. He didn't say a word, just punched into the register with these jerky, robotic movements. I noticed his hands were filthy, like he hadn't washed them in days. As I waited, I glanced around. The dining area was empty except for one other person, a woman sitting in the far corner with her back to me. She wasn't eating, just sitting there, completely still. Her long, dark hair hung down, almost covering her face. Something about her posture felt wrong, like her body was too rigid, like she wasn't really alive. I tried to shake off the feeling, but then I noticed something else. The menu boards behind the counter, they were all wrong. The items were normal, but the prices were bizarre. $666 for a Frosty, $999 for a small fry. At first, I thought it was a glitch, but then I looked at the cashier. He was grinning now. Not a friendly grin. It was stretched too wide, like his skin didn't quite fit his face. My stomach dropped. "Actually, I changed my mind. I'm gonna head out. Thanks anyways," I stammered. But before I could turn, I heard the sound of the door behind me click. I whipped around. The door was locked. I looked back at the cashier, and now he wasn't behind the counter anymore. He was standing in front of it, way closer than he should have been, like he just appeared there, his grin widened, showing yellow, jagged teeth. "Please, stay," he rasped. His voice sounded like it hadn't been used in years, dry and cracking. I bolted for the side door near the bathrooms. Just as I reached the handle, I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of the glass. That woman, the one in the corner, was standing now, but it wasn't a woman. Her face was wrong, pale with hollow black eyes and a mouth that hung open wider than humanly possible. I didn't think, I just ran. I sprinted to the back, through the kitchen, slipping on grease and nearly falling. The smell back there was overwhelming, rotting meat, like something had died and been left there for days. I shoved through the back exit door into the alley behind the restaurant. The second I hit the cold air, I didn't stop. I ran to my car, fumbling with my keys. But as I jumped into my car and locked the doors, I looked back at the restaurant. The lights were off, completely, like the place had never been opened. The lot was empty, no cars, no sign of the cashier or the woman. It was like none of it had even happened. But I know I did it. Because when I got home, I found the Wendy's receipt in my pocket. No items listed. Just one word printed at the bottom. It smeared in red ink. Run. I haven't been back to that part of town since. But sometimes when I drive past other Wendy's late at night, I swear I still see him, standing behind the counter, grinning. And I don't stop. I used to work at Wendy's during college. It wasn't anything special, just one of those jobs you take to pay the bills. This location was off a quiet highway, kind of tucked away from the main road. It wasn't a bad spot, but late at night, especially during closing shifts, the place felt different. The lights were dimmer, the shadows stretched longer, and the parking lot always seemed a little too empty. This one particular night, I was scheduled to close with a coworker, Josh. He was cool, always cracking jokes, but that night, he called in sick last minute. So it was just me and my manager, Carl. Carl was this grumpy, middle-aged guy who barely spoke unless he had to. And when he did, it was usually just to complain. It was a slow night, barely any customers after 9 p.m. By 11:30, we were just cleaning up, getting ready to shut down. I was in the back, scrubbing the fryers when I heard the door chime. That was weird. We'd locked the doors at 11, like we always did. I peeked out from the kitchen and saw someone standing at the counter. He was tall, wearing this oversized hoodie with the hood pulled low over his face. I couldn't see much. Something about how he just stood there still made me uneasy. I called out, "Hey man, we're closed." No response. I looked over at Carl, who was mopping near the soda machines. He hadn't noticed yet. I called out again, louder this time. "We're closed!" Still nothing. The guy just stood there, like he didn't even hear me. Carl finally looked up, annoyed. "What the hell?" he muttered, dropping the mop and headed toward the counter. As he approached, the guy slowly lifted his head, and that's when I saw his face. Or what was left of it. His skin was pale and stretched tight, like it was barely clinging to his skull. His eyes were sunken, almost hollow, and his mouth, it was twisted into this grotesque, unnatural grin, like someone had carved it into his face. Carl froze. "Hey buddy, you need to leave, now." Before he could finish, the lights flickered, and then everything went dark. I swear, it wasn't just a normal power outage. It felt wrong. The kind of darkness that feels heavy, like it's pressing in on you. I could hear Carl cursing under his breath, fumbling for the emergency lights. But then, I heard something else. Footsteps. Not running, just slow steps echoing through the dining area. I backed up into the kitchen. I reached for the phone, but of course no signal, just static. Then I heard Carl scream. Not like he'd tripped on something. It was a blood-curdling, guttural scream that made my stomach twist. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I just stood there, paralyzed, listening to the sound of something or someone dragging across the floor. Then it stopped. Silence. I didn't know what to do. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't listen. Then, I saw it. A shadow moved across the kitchen wall, just outside the doorway. It wasn't Carl. It was too tall, too thin. Its movements were unnatural, like it was gliding instead of walking. I snapped out of it and bolted for the back exit. I shoved through the door into the alley, not daring to look back. The air was freezing, but I didn't stop. I ran across the lot, my breath coming in and out, until I reached my car. As I fumbled with my keys, I took one last look at the Wendy's restaurant. Through the front windows, I saw him. That thing, standing behind the counter like he worked there. And next to him, slumped over the register, was Carl. His body was limp, his head tilted at a sickening angle. But the worst part? Carl's face had that same twisted grin. I didn't wait to see more. I jumped into my car and sped off, tires screeching as I tore down the highway. The next morning, I went to the cops. When they checked the place, they found nothing. No sign of Carl, no forced entry. The cameras, of course, completely wiped. They told me Carl probably just ditched his shift and that I was overreacting. But I know what I saw. I quit that job the next day. But sometimes when I drive past that Wendy's late at night, I swear I see someone standing inside, just staring. And every time I wonder if it's still him, or if it's my crazy manager, Carl. I was the night manager at a Wendy's in a small town just outside of Cincinnati. It wasn't a bad job, but night shifts were always a little eerie. The restaurant sat at the edge of a strip mall, surrounded by empty parking lots and flickering streetlights. After 10 p.m., it felt like the whole world just disappeared. This particular night started like any other. It was me, two crew members, Jenna and Marcus, and we were getting through the last hour before closing. It was slow, as usual, with the occasional drive-through order keeping us from falling asleep on our feet. Around 11:45, I sent Jenna to start cleaning the lobby while Marcus and I handled the kitchen. The plan was to be able to be out by midnight sharp. Then at 11:55 p.m., something strange happened. The front door chimed. Now that might not sound weird, but we'd locked the doors at 11:30. I know I locked them. It's part of the routine. I poked my head out from around the kitchen and saw a man standing just inside the entrance. He was tall, wearing a long dark coat, and his face was shadowed under a wide-brimmed hat. He wasn't looking at the counter, the menu, nothing. He was staring directly at me. I felt this sudden wave of unease, like my body recognized something was wrong before my brain could catch up. "Sorry, sir, we're closed," I called out. He didn't move, didn't blink, just kept staring. Jenna, wiping tables near the back, whispered, "I thought you locked the doors." "I did," I muttered, already walking toward the front to usher him out. But as I got closer, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The guy's clothes looked old, like really old. His coat was frayed, and the buttons were tarnished, like they belonged to another century. His shoes were scuffed leather, cracked with age, and his hands, what I could see of them, were pale and thin, with long, bony fingers that didn't look quite right. "Sir, we're closed. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." That's when he finally moved. But he didn't turn around or walk out like a normal person. He tilted his head slowly, like his neck was on a rusty hinge. His mouth stretched into this crooked, unnatural smile. And then, without touching anything, the lights cut out. The entire restaurant went pitch black. Jenna screamed. Marcus shouted from the kitchen. I fumbled for my phone, trying to turn on the flashlight, but my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. When I finally got the light on, the man was gone, but the front door still locked. And then I heard it, a voice, low and rasping, coming from the back of the restaurant. near the walk-in freezer. You shouldn't be here. I spun around. Jenna was crying now, and Marcus had come out of the kitchen, his face pale as a ghost. I'm calling the cops, he whispered, but when he pulled out his phone, he froze. No service, he muttered, staring at his screen in disbelief. That's when the freezer door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the restaurant, and for a split second, none of us moved. Then Jenna bolted for the exit, yanking on the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was like it was welded shut. I grabbed a metal broom handle and crept toward the freezer. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe that someone was playing a sick joke. When I opened the door, there was no one inside. But the temperature wasn't normal. It was freezing, way colder than it should have been, like walking into the dead of winter. And scrawled in frost across the back wall was the words, "Let me in." That was it. I wasn't about to stick around to find out what came next. I grabbed Jenna and Marcus, and we ran to the back exit, kicking it open with everything we had. We didn't stop running until we were halfway down the block. When the cops finally showed up, they found the restaurant exactly how we'd left it, except the freezer door was wide open, and the frost writing was gone. They said there was no sign of forced entry, and the security cameras completely blank from the moment the man appeared. I quit the next day. Here's the thing, though, that still haunts me. About a week later, I saw a news article about a fire that had burned down an old house about 10 miles from that Wendy's. The photo in the paper showed the man who used to live there. Same coat, same hat, same twisted smile. The article said he died in that house over 50 years ago.